Okay, this video is meant to be sort of a follow-up to my video called Let's Get Real About Whiteness, and I will be using pretty much the same anecdotes. So if you're interested in watching it, I'm going to link it below. But if you haven't watched it, you can still watch it. But since I made that video, I have been thinking a lot about this topic and thinking a lot about white supremacy and about my last video was basically about how the culture that we have created where white women are starting to be very like we have this deep insecurity, and because of that insecurity we are turning to a lot of white women have turned to blackifying themselves and running away from their whiteness, even the progressive white people. So um yeah, I was thinking a lot about that. I was thinking a lot about what I said about by experience in the public school system, and how the white kids very frequently would repeat the idea that black children or children of color were sort of stealing their spots in these nicer schools. So I'm gonna go into all of that. I actually had planned to script this all out, but I think sometimes I kill my flow when I write it. So I'm just gonna do my best to get this all out in a neat little flow here. But all right, so I've been thinking about how I think that even though white supremacy is obviously built to benefit white people, I think on a deeper level, we are starting to see the ways in which white supremacy actually hinders us as individuals and as human beings, and how I think that white supremacy robs white people of a lot of really important sort of lessons and traits and things like that that I'm now seeing of people of color developing, that we as white people, having been comfortable, have not developed. And because of that, there's a moment of deep resentment, insecurity, and all of these things as I think the dynamic is shifting. So, yeah. The first point that I wanted to talk about was how, so if you haven't seen the last video, I went to a public school system where we had a very complicated racial dynamic. There were white schools really and black schools, even though they weren't meant to be that, they ended up that way. And there were certain schools, as you got into the higher levels, there were certain schools that you applied to. And the very, very nice schools that were like, top academic schools, high schools, and things like that, ended up being majority white children. Very few black children ever got into those schools. Some Asian children, but from the counties, like Indian, Chinese, from the surrounding area. I would say that was the main demographic. I definitely did not know a lot of Hispanic. I don't think I knew a single Hispanic child who went to those schools, but at least in the time that I was in my, living in my city. But when it came time in middle school, when we were about 13 years old, we would apply to these schools, 13, 14. And this happened when I was that age. And then a few years later, when my sister was applying to school, she actually got this exact statement targeted towards her. But I started to hear white children basically say that they were nervous that they weren't going to get into these schools because nowadays, all the black children were going to get picked over them because they wanted diversity and all of these things. And so they weren't going to be able to make it into the school. And then a few years later, my sister, so I'm mixed. So I'm half Latina. So my mom is Brazilian and half like just straight up white. But when my sister got into the school, even though we appear white, when my sister got in, this one white child said to her, you only got in because you're Latina and they want diversity. And I go more in depth into my other video. But I have been thinking a lot about that situation, that dynamic. And first of all, I think it's really interesting because I think it's the same exact cultural demographic that whines about how liberals want to give everyone a participation trophy are basically the kind to tell white children that they don't win because a child of color stole from them, that they are the most deserving, that I guess all of these white children from these upper class backgrounds should be getting into the school and they're deserving. And I think the whole participation trophy thing is like these kinds of people are mad because they're like, nowadays everyone just gets to win, and it's back in the day it was about developing toughness and winning, and it's like It's very interesting because I think that when you tell white children that they are not getting into schools, not because they just weren't good enough, but because black children or children of color are beating them into the schools, you are telling them essentially like you are robbing them of the moment of really experiencing a sense of failure, experiencing a moment of like, wow, I wasn't smart enough. I didn't make it. I wasn't good enough. I didn't get in. And they are able to cover the fact that they didn't get into something that they cared about. They didn't get into that Ivy League school. They didn't get into the nice school, whatever, because a black child or a Hispanic child or something stole it from them, which is rarely true because in these schools it's still majority white. But I think that rather than being facing the failure and facing the emotions and the anxieties and all these things, they basically go on with their lives thinking, well, I'm actually the best. I'm still the best. It's just that somebody stole it from me unfairly, rather than being like, hey, there's children that deserve it more. I think that white children sometimes do not know how to sit with, hey, somebody is better than me. Somebody beat me. I'm not the number one. I'm not the best one. And they turn towards these sorts of narratives. And I saw that, with my sister, like, when she got in, it wasn't because she was deserving, but because she was of a different demographic or she had some element of diversity that allowed her to get in. So white children are allowed to constantly cover up their mediocrity with the story that they are just being discriminated against in these school systems. And I think that something that I've learned from my life, because I've failed a lot at a lot of things, is that, it is very important to learn how to fail. And if you can fail and you can get back up again and continue to try, you will develop self-esteem, you will develop inner strength, and you will develop resilience. But I think when these white children are not getting into schools, they are not developing internal resilience in the slightest. They are just covering it up with the idea that they're not actually, it was fake, it's not true. And they never have to build that sense of like, hey, I failed. I might not be good enough. There might be somebody smarter than me. You know what I'm saying? I think that they are not being encouraged to develop really true, like real true resilience. And then they're turning around and throwing a little bit of a temper tantrum or saying something very rude, being racist, and just having these racist outbursts. And it's like, that's not just because they're racist, but it's because they're internally weak. They are internally weak people. They are not developing internal strength. And I think that white supremacy is robbing white children of their ability to build self-esteem, genuine inner strength, because they're constantly covering up those moments of like, oh man, I'm not good enough, with something that will twist it into, yeah, I actually was good enough. They are very afraid to sit with the idea that they are not good enough for something, and they don't want to face it, and they have the luxury of having an out to not face the fact that they are not good enough for something that they wanted. I think that to counter that, because when I did not get into the school that I wanted to, right, I didn't get into the governor's school, that the art school. I am very, very grateful for that. I'm very grateful that I got into the other school that I went to, which I talk about in the other videos, majority black school. But I had a moment of crisis when I didn't get in. I'm not gonna lie. It didn't feel great. I thought, wow, like I read my poetry for them. They didn't like my poetry enough, I guess. And I saw other children get into the school and I was like, oh, maybe I'm not that great at writing. Like maybe I'm just not as good as I thought. And I think that that was something important for me to sit with at the time, because I think that internally I had to build that. I had to sit with that idea and be like, hey, even if I'm not good enough, I'm still going to write poetry. Or you know what? I can always improve. I can always keep writing. Just because I didn't get into the school doesn't mean that I'm bad, doesn't mean that I just suck. But it's just part of the game that sometimes, maybe right now those weren't the best poems to put in your application. Maybe, they just were looking for something else. And I think that that taught me that to fail, but then also to persevere and to keep writing and keep trying to develop myself. And I think that that's always going to be an important lesson for a young child to learn, and I think that also white parents who teach their children these narratives are avoiding the conversation with their children that goes, hey, you know what? You failed and that's okay. We still love you. it's okay to fail. You're not always going to get everything that you want. Sometimes in life, there might be somebody who's going to beat you to it, and that's okay. That's a part of life, and that's a part of growth, is that sometimes you're not going to get everything. And I think that that's a moment of authentic connection, authentic love, and really learning and developing a deep sense of yourself that white children are. It's actually sad that they don't get that, and they don't get that moment with their parents where their parents tell them like, hey, it's okay for you to fail. Instead, they're being told, yeah, it was probably because they wanted a black child or they wanted a Hispanic child. And see how that anxiety, I think that's a very anxiety inducing thing to even tell a younger child. And it's not, they're still going to get to benefit from it. So I'm not necessarily feeling sorry for it. But I think that you're teaching children to have a paranoia that children of color are always going to be able to, and it's a complete lie. It's actually a complete lie. At the end of the day, white children are still most of the universities are really, especially top university, are still filled with white children, lots of white children. But I think it's just this sort of myth, this sort of story that I think white children or white parents are passing down to their white children so that they don't have to sit with the fact that maybe they're not good enough. Sometimes, this is something I learned at my high school. I cared about my school a lot. I studied like crazy. I wanted to be top of my class. And, I would have loved to be valedictorian, salutatorian. I wasn't. I was third in my class. I'm still extremely proud of that. You know who beat me out? 2 black children. We had a black valedictorian, salutatorian. And you know what? I think I learned to just be happy for them and be like, hey, that's really cool. I'm proud of them. It was one of my best friends who actually was a valedictorian. And it's like, yeah, that's a cool moment to learn how to be happy for other people's successes as well, and to not feel like you always need to be the one to win. Do you see these valuable lessons that I think that white children are missing out on all of the time? That, it's cool to be okay with somebody, you should be happy for other people winning. You don't need to win at everything. You sometimes it's okay to fail, and failure will build perseverance for you. Now, here's another, this is also kind of going off of my video, but to give an alternative example, I think I talked in my video about how I think that black women right now are having an amazing moment in terms of their self-confidence. I see a lot of black women really starting to feel like this. They developed such a deep relationship to their natural hair, to their natural beauty, and to Afrocentric beauty as well. And I see that growing and building. And I see there's a lot of material now, a lot of sort of self-talk, sort of material out for black women right now to be confident, to love themselves. And there's this narrative that's built because they face so much oppression for their beauty, for everything. I mean, for so many elements of being a black woman were so looked down upon. Over time, black women felt the need to straighten their hair, and all sorts of different narratives that black women had to deal with, that they weren't enough, or they weren't classy, whatever. And I think that I see black women now really thriving and succeeding. And I think that because of that, I see that they're developing such deep confidence, such deep self-love, going on self-love journeys, going on journeys with their hair. And I think that we, as white women, we have been so comfortable, we did not develop that. We never had to, right? We never had to. We were always on top. And this is the first time that that black women have really started to become the standard. Now, what do we see? White women are not leaning into a self-love journey. They are getting surgeries, modifying, getting lip fillers, getting BBLs, trying to act black, trying to look black, and they are embarrassed to be white. They don't want to look white, right? Because even though they had the upper hand and they have been the standard forever, the first moment that they haven't been the standard, they've completely flopped. And they've developed a horrible low self-esteem, right? Because it wasn't true confidence built off of those lessons that they had to learn over time. It was not. It was a really false sense of confidence of you're always going to win. You're always the most beautiful. You're always there. Notice how when you tell children, the participation trophy people, are trying to say this, and yet I feel like so many of them have this attitude towards white supremacy and encourage it. But it's Do you see how the first moment of where, you know, they hit a bump along the road, the resilience was not there. There was no resilience. And now we are stuck as white women with this low self-esteem about our features and about who we are. And this is a great failure. Look at us failing right now. This moment of failure is an absolutely amazing moment for us to start leaning into true confidence. You know, you don't have to change yourself. All of these things that Black women have authentically learned through their oppression, that we need to actually start to develop ourselves, not by trying to put ourselves back on top, and not by trying to be Black women, but about by saying like, hey, we are not going to win every competition. Sometimes Black women are going to be the beauty standards. Sometimes, you know, maybe they're going to be the ones that people want. You know what I mean? And of course, that's not going to be, of course, everybody's always going to be wanted by their own people. But I'm talking about in terms of our collective narrative. I know these are very complex things, but I think that it's not a moment for us to say, hey, we're just going to pretend to be Black because Black people are on top. Because I've been sitting so much with this. It's like, you know, I think that whiteness is not, this isn't a text that I showed. Whiteness has nothing to do even with color at the end of the day, but with privilege and your relationship to privilege and to winning and to being, you know, to domination. And notice how the minute somebody else started winning, white people completely lost their identity. They completely lost their identity and their sense of self and started taking on whatever the identity of the winner was, right? And whoever was on top, they just morphed themselves into that identity, right? Because they don't have a true sense of true identity. And that's the thing, is that when you don't develop yourself through failure, and this is just the rules of life, when you don't develop yourself through failure, through real like character building and you know, real hard work, real genuine like, hey, sometimes you're not going to be on top, you will lose your sense of identity the minute you start to lose and the minute you start to fail. So what is white supremacy robbing us of as white people? True self-esteem, true self-love, a sort of process of character building and of really sitting with ourselves and who we are, and you know, and our sense of identity. Your sense of identity, if your sense of identity is built around supremacy, what's going to happen when you're not you know, on top? What's going to happen when people start to really beat you out and honestly, you know, to do better than you? Because it's going to happen. Because this is the thing, is that it's going to happen because that's the way of the world. If people, when you have people in the background authentically, you know, developing themselves, authentically developing their skills, their sense of self and who they are, yes, they're going to beat you out at things, and that's natural. That is going to happen. And I think that we just need to get to a point where we are okay. We need to learn as white people how to lose gracefully and not start pointing fingers and be like, hey, it's because that person's Black or we are being oppressed. You know, all of a sudden people are being racist to us. Sometimes we lose, bro. That is life. That happens. And I think it's sad the way we rob white children of learning those lessons that will give you true self-love and really make you have a close relationship to yourself and care about yourself. We are losing out on that for our whole lives because of what white supremacy is teaching white children. So yeah, that is a follow-up to my last video. I've definitely been thinking about that a lot, and I think we'll keep thinking about it, and just have been thinking about whiteness a lot recently. And yeah, there's so much to sit with. But now here's what's gonna happen. I'm telling you intuitively. Okay, we are about to see children of color, teenagers of color, people of color popping out crazy cool things, super smart stuff, super creative, amazing applications, just extremely intelligent, you know. It's going to happen because they have been developing themselves. They have been developing a different attitude. They have been developing, you know, they have been learning about the world through a different lens, having different experiences. And what's going to happen? White mediocrity is not, you know, is going to start to not maybe seem so great anymore. And I think that unfortunately white children have been gotten so used to winning that I think the winning of white children, or like the way that they win has gotten formulaic, right? I think that white people already know what they need to do to win the game, and they're going to do that, you know? And I think that we're about to see so many children of color people of color of all ages start to pop out with some really genius stuff, really intelligent, just really cool new perspectives. And white mediocrity is not going to seem so great. So white people, if you want to get on the same wavelength, if you want to be producing cool stuff too, you're going to have to start facing yourself, and you're going to have to start being okay with failure, and you're going to start to have to be okay developing a different perspective, because we have seen the perspective of white people, I would say, probably altogether too much. I think we have seen white upper middle class people's perspective always. It's not exciting anymore. It's not cool anymore. A little bit. So I think, like, I genuinely think that's what about to happen. So I think that in the wake of that, white children, I think that everybody who's been facing some kind of oppression, I think has really, I see so much narrative about self-love, developing yourself, and really getting up there. And I think that, unfortunately, to the people who are white and cannot face failure, it's going to be a really difficult and painful moment if you can't learn to fail, and you can't learn to be happy for your peers that are going to start to do really great and really show up and really pop out with some cool stuff. And I think we're already seeing that in, like, the music industry. We're already seeing that in the art world. And I think that's been a really difficult moment. And that's why we're seeing people starting to act black, rich people starting to act like they're poor, act depressed, because they don't have the interesting perspective, unfortunately. So I think that, if I think we need to start being okay with failure and being like, hey, you know what? It might be less of our moment right now. And also, if we want to have, start to actually create authentically cool things and to get on any kind of the same level, we need to start developing true, real relationships with ourselves, built in self-reflection, and really sitting with our sort of individuality. And I think that my sister and I had this conversation that, and especially in our city, the white middle class boys all dress the same, listen to the same music, and it wasn't very interesting. Unfortunately, they all wear the same exact outfits that are not very creative outfits. And we were talking about, like, why do we think that is? And this isn't even to be offensive. This is just, I think, a reflection, a cultural observation. But I think that it comes down to, I think, when you're being challenged all the time, you're going to start to create really cool stuff, because you have to sit with yourself and you have to get uncomfortable. And when we get uncomfortable, we start to produce interesting and different things, right? Because we start to have a new, different perspective on the world. When you're comfortable all the time, your stuff is not going to be interesting. So white people, take it as a gift that we, I think, are about to get really uncomfortable and see some really, really cool people start to pop out, and really start to see people of color of our age, if you're my age, younger, whatever, getting into getting into the schools and having a really cool moment, because they've been authentically developing themselves, while we white people have not been authentically developing ourselves. We have been sticking, I mean, individually, I'm sure I would say here and there we have, but as a group, I think either we have to just be like, hey, whiteness is fake and it's gonna go away, which I hope so, or we have to start being like, if we want to keep claiming that whiteness exists, then we're gonna have to have an uncomfortable moment if we want to even keep up, because we have not been keeping up. We have been sticking with the status quo, and in sticking with the status quo, we have not been getting interesting, and we have stuck to our very boring set perspectives. I'm saying we because I think we, for the sake of conversation, but I think that we have really been sticking to the status quo as a group. If we want to keep calling ourselves a group, if not, we got to dissipate and just be like, hey, all this stuff is fake. But that's the reality. If you want to be producing cool stuff, you got to get uncomfortable, and you have to be okay with you're gonna fail. It's not always gonna be you to win, and I think we're about to not really we're really not going to be winning, I think, or really creating the interesting perspectives that I think we're about to see people of color really producing from the authentic, genuine relationships that they have been forced to build with themselves. I think that's just reality. I'm speaking it out into existence. I've always had amazing intuition, and I've just really been intuitively feeling recently that I think we're about to see some really cool people pop up with some really, really cool things. If you have been marginalized in any way, I think it's going to be a really cool moment, and I can't wait to see all the genius and interesting perspectives that are about to pop out. I really have felt that as, like, an intuitive feeling. So yeah.